Hi there, I'm the _twig and I like analysing game rules. I've had so much fun going back over the Heavy Obscurement rules recently that I just had to make a build around it, and of every possible user, by far the most buffed and changed one is the Shadow Monk, so let's go with that. The Shadow Monk's primary feature is this, Shadow Arts, which lets us cast Darkness by spending only one focus point, used to be 2, and when we do, we can see through it. That means that whenever we have Darkness up, all of our attacks will have advantage, all attacks against us will have disadvantage, we can run around without opportunity attacks, so we don't need to use patient defense, and we can't be targeted by any features which require sight. That includes most targeted save-based effects, like Tash's Hideous Laughter or a Ghost's Possession. The other fun thing about this build is that we're using a load of throwing weapons. That wasn't actually the plan going in, it just turns out that throwers were the best options here, which I think is really cool. We rarely get to see a strong throwing character. Now, since we're using Darkness, this build works especially well in parties with a Devil's Sight Warlock, or a Fighter, Ranger or Paladin with Blind Fighting. So if you want to use it, tell your other players about those features to see if they want to do some teamwork. If not though, that's still fine. I've made sure that this build can avoid getting in the way of your party barbarian or whatever, who would otherwise have their reckless attack turned off. I do need to warn you though that this build simply does not work against anything with Blind Sight, True Sight or Devil's Sight. So if you're going to be playing Descent into Avernus, maybe don't play a Shadow Monk. Of course, the easiest way to get out of Avernus is actually to just join my Patreon. Just like how giving money to the church gets you into heaven, giving money to me gets you into Mount Celestia, as well as early access to my videos, and you get to join my private Discord. Actually no, that's a lie. Followers of the Doer go to the Eternal Gardens, which are at least 10 times better than some stupid hill. Ask SK, Mark Rainbow and Biney about them. They have actually seen what awaits you after you die. Right then, let's get on with the build. This is what I'm calling the Black Volley, because Darkness is black and we're throwing a volley of weapons. It's a really clever name which goes incredibly deep and hits hard on the fundamental truths of society, capitalism and the human condition. Fairly standard monk stats, 17 dex, 16 whiz, 14 con, and then I'm putting the remaining points in strength, purely to boost carrying capacity. Since we're throwing, we need to carry a lot of weapons with us, and as such, this might come up. If your table doesn't care about carrying capacity, I'd probably put these two in intelligence instead. Int saves are reasonably punishing, so the +1 is useful. For our species, I've gone with Wood Elf. We'll always have an advantage, our bonus action is going to be really good, and we're already going to be immune to a fair chunk of whiz saves, simply due to them often requiring sight, so our good options are essentially just human, dwarf and elf. Wood Elf gets 5 foot of extra speed, which will help us keep out of our allies' ways at lower levels, as well as perception proficiency and Long Strider and Pass Without Trace, which are 2 very good spells which are nice and thematic for what's going to be a very speedy character who excels at scouting and infiltration. Our origin feed will then be Alert, which is extremely good on the monk. It boosts our already high initiative, meaning that we're even more likely to roll well, and then we can swap our initiative down to allow the wizard to go first and use their big control spell. There's also some incredibly rare circumstances where this build simply doesn't work raw if we go first. Those circumstances do require an incredibly strict reading of the Darkness spell though, which I don't think many tables will ultimately require. Other options were Tough, Musician, and maybe a Lucky for some important checks and saves. I do not recommend Tavern Brawler for this build, it's incredibly redundant. I also want to quickly go over my assumptions for combats. I'm assuming 4 combats per day, averaging at 4 turns each, as well as 1 short rest. Previously I've seen people assume 8 fights with 2 short rests, however I don't think I have ever seen a table do that much in a single day. All of my damage calculations will be based on this 4-on-1 assumption, and that's especially important for our focus points because these define how often we can use Flurry of Blows. We regain all focus points on a short rest or when using Uncanny Metabolism, and as such, rather than assuming every fight is exactly 4 turns, I'm just going to call that 16 rounds across the day and say that Uncanny Metabolism and our short rest gives full refills. For example, as a 5th level monk, we'd have 5 times 3 equals 15 focus points to spend across 4 fights. This is simply to streamline the maths, although I guess that it means that there could be some slight overestimates in the DPR compared to a real table. The overestimate is probably only about 2 DPR at most though, so it's not big. Our first level, however, will not be in Monk, but in Fighter. We were going to take fight levels at some point, so we may as well do it immediately to get con saves as well as early access to masteries and a fighting style. Initially, we'll be using a hand crossbow and then throwing a dagger, so we'll put our masteries in those for Vex and Nick, and then also the short sword for Vex as well, in case we get stuck in melee. Our fighting style will be thrown weapon fighting. Starting from 2nd level, thrown weapon fighting is slightly stronger than 2-weapon fighting, simply because we add +2 to every attack rather than +3 to 5 to just 1, but it is only barely stronger. We'll be using the Nick property all the way throughout, so if you want to take 2-weapon fighting because you consider thrown weapon fighting to be cheesy or something, sure, take that. You lose less than 2 DPR at most, normally less than 1 for the majority of the build. On the subject of DPR, let's explain these purple columns. The first one is a Fighter 1 Rogue 19 using a heavy crossbow with archery and true strike. This is what I'm using as my standard for average damage. If you want to see how I came to this conclusion, check out this video. I then have these 4 columns on the right which show the DPR on each individual turn, depending on if we use our bonus action to make a single unarmed strike or to do a flurry of blows. Obviously at the moment we don't have any bonus actions, so they're blank. I then have this build average DPR, which takes those 4 columns, does some maths, and tells us what our actual average damage on a turn will be. Finally, this percent over standard tells you how much more damage our monk is doing when compared to the rogue. The bigger that number, the more exceptional our damage. I'd normally have some sort of colour coding here, just to give bands on how good the damage actually is, but I haven't really worked out what those should be yet. Right, with level 1 out of the way, let's go into level 2, where we multiclass into Monk, giving us Monk weapons, unarmored defense, and our martial arts bonus action attack. That's an immediate boost to both damage and defense. We'll swap our weapons over to the hand axe and dagger, both of which are now dexterity D6 weapons, and I'm going to put our 3rd mastery onto the javelin, just on the off chance that slow is ever useful. The spear's sap, or even the heavy crossbow's push could also be good options. Our primary strategy at this level will be to throw our hand axe and dagger, then run in and finish off with an unarmed strike, hopefully meaning that we never actually end our turn in melee. Okay, we're throwing multiple weapons per turn now. As such, I'm going to quickly walk you through the weapon juggle required, although this is possibly the most vanilla, rules as intended weapon juggle ever. So, we'll be starting our turn with a javelin in our right hand and what I'm going to be calling the darkness stick in our left hand. More on the darkness stick later, and I think that on most tables it won't be necessary. I'm purely including it to make this build entirely raw compliant. So, we take the attack action, and as part of this attack we can stow our javelin. The thrown property of the hand axe then lets us draw and throw it for free, and then the nick and thrown properties of the dagger let us draw and throw that for free too. Since our dagger attack was also a part of the attack action, we can then redraw our javelin, and then make an unarmed strike by kicking or headbutting or something like that. You don't need a free hand for an unarmed strike. Nice, simple, easy juggle. They aren't all scary rules-abusing abominations that only freaks like me adore. Level 3 for 2nd level monk, and we get our monk's focus and uncanny metabolism. Currently the only thing that we're spending our focus on is flurry of blows, so we're using all 6 daily points on that, giving our damage a good boost. As you can see, using flurry increases our damage on each individual turn by about 4. We also get unarmoured movement, boosting our speed to 45 feet, and long strider if we want to go even faster. 4th level, and we are officially shadow monks. Shadow Arts gives us the super cool see-through darkness, as well as increases our normal dark vision to 120 feet, and gives us minor illusion, an incredibly good cantrip. We also get deflect attacks, which is a fantastic defensive reaction. I am assuming that we cast darkness on turn 1, and it lasts for the entire fight. This is because we have good defenses, with disadvantage on attacks and immunity to a lot of the standard concentration ending spells like Hold Person, as well as the positional benefit of not being on the front line. And also just having constitution proficiency and deflect attacks to reduce damage, meaning that even if we do get hit, we're very likely to make our save. Right, now that we have darkness, let's talk about the darkness stick. Darkness cannot be cast on something that is being worn or held. If you've ever cast darkness on your sword or something like that, sorry, but that was not raw. You were either wearing or holding it. If you want to cast it on an object that you can carry around with you to move the darkness, you need to cast it on some environmental object that is just on the floor, such as a rock in a cave, a tankard in a bar, or a stick in a forest. You can then run in and pick this darkness stick up, then carry it around and the darkness will move with you. I don't think that many tables actually follow this rule though, so ask your DM if you can just cast darkness on your hat and skip the darkness stick requirements. If however you do need your darkness stick, what happens if there is nothing around? Maybe you're fighting in a tournament and there's a completely flat arena. That is where alert comes in. We're swapping initiative to let the wizard go first anyways, so let's just ask the wizard to also carry around a stick. For their free once per turn utilise, they can simply drop it on the ground, and then it's ready for us to cast darkness on it. See, darkness creates fun teamwork. The Shadow Monk's version also allows you to move it free at the start of your turn, but using a darkness stick is just better because that way you can move it both before and after your attacks to keep it out of the party's way. 5th level, 4th level monk, and we get slow fall, a nice ribbon, as well as once per day pass without trace to go with our high perception and stealth, making us fantastic scouts. More importantly, a feat. The standard choice for monks at 4 is grappler, but we're using our attack action to throw things, and we already have advantage on all attacks. Next up is normally weapon master, but we already have that from fighter. Charger would normally be good on a monk, but it doesn't work with thrown weapons, so we're ultimately trading one instance of +2 damage for a +1d8 damage, a very small increase. As such, I'm taking a defensive option, Mage Slayer. This gives us a once per day automatic success on any mental save, which is absolutely incredible, and also gives enemies disadvantage on their concentration saves when we hit them. Given that on a Flurry of Blows turn we're making 4 attacks, a caster with +5 on their save only has about a 20% chance to keep their concentration. If they have just +3, then it's only 10%. This gets even better later on when we'll be making 6 attacks every single turn. It also gives us +1 dex to boost everything that boosts. Level up to 6 and we get extra attack, d8 martial arts, and stunning strike. I'm not accounting for any stunning strike usage in the DPR. It doesn't really boost your DPR directly, but it can boost it for your allies, and it obviously also steals actions. Now with our extra attack, we'll be throwing a javelin for slow. This requires an extra step to our juggle, but it's literally just the same thing another time, so I won't bother showing it again. Here's the timestamp if you want to remind yourself. By the way, we're effectively doing 2 weapon fighting with only one hand in this build. That is entirely allowed. See this video where I explain the light property in detail, but it is also just because we need to hold the darkness stick. If your DM is happy to ignore the darkness stick, then both your hands will be free and you can do whatever you like with them. Level 7, we get 50-foot speed and our unarmed strikes now do force damage. By the way, we're now up to 14 of our 16 turns throughout the day being Flurry of Blows. This is because we have 6 times 3 equals 18 focus points and we need to spend 4 of them on darkness. We also get Shadow Step, which isn't especially useful in combat due to us already ignoring opportunity attacks, having a high speed, and a very strong bonus action in Flurry of Blows, but it can come up. For example, if someone grapples us, it's an easy way to escape. It's most useful out of combat, where it's a completely free teleport. Great for sneaking around. Level 8 brings us Evasion, making the effects like Fireball, which can hit us, far less potent. We're also up to the full 16 out of 16 Flurry of Blows. We can now use it every single turn, as well as using Darkness on turn 1 of each fight, and any leftovers can be spent on Stunning Strike or throwing back a deflect attacks. Now, level 9 gives us another feat, and this one I was kind of stumped on. I've already explained why Grappler, Weapon Master, and Charger aren't great. Speedy isn't too useful because we already ignore opportunity attacks. Sentinel isn't useful because we're not normally on the front line, and Defensive Duelist isn't useful because we're mostly getting targeted at range, and we already have a great reaction in deflect attacks. So that leaves +2 Dex, Skill Expert for Perception, Piercer, or Slasher, or the one other really odd feat that I did ultimately pick. Let's have a look at our defences. Enemies have disadvantage to hit us, and we have deflect attacks if they do. We have con proficiency. Most targeted saves can't target us because they require sight, and if we do fail a mental save, Mage Slayer lets us succeed anyway. Our biggest vulnerability is actually big AoE stuff like Fireball. Since we have Evasion, passing our dex saves against these actually means that we take no damage, so we don't even need to make a concentration save. As such, this is a monk with resilient dexterity. I think that might be a brand new sentence, but I legitimately believe that it is the best option that we have here. After that really weird level 9, acrobatic movement comes in, mostly as a ribbon. I will point out though that alongside a dash and shadow step, we can actually scale 160 foot tall buildings. That's about the same height as the Arc de Triomphe, or roughly 13 or 14 stories. Level 11 is what we've really been waiting for. Heightened focus lets us make 3 unarmed strikes with flurry of blows, a huge boost to our offences. We also get self-restoration, letting us shrug off several conditions for free, and our speed goes up to 55 feet. Add another story to our buildings, and we can now even carry someone up with the Step of the Wind. We now have almost everything that we wanted from Monk, so for level 12 we're going back to Fighter to pick up Action Surge and Tactical Mind, which gives us a solid boost to our skill checks. We have 1 short rest per day, so we'll get to use Action Surge twice. Make sure that you use it on the turn that you cast Darkness, because that will give us the extra Nick Dagger attack. You can only get that once per turn, so Action Surging on a turn we already attacked means that we'll be missing out. Right, at 13 we get our Fighter subclass, and I'm going to be going with Champion. Remarkable Athlete gives us advantage on initiative, making it even more likely that our Wizard will go first, and Improved Critical is actually just pretty solid. We have so many attacks and advantage on all of them, meaning that a crit on 19 is actually pretty impactful. 14th level for Champion 4, and I'm just taking an ASI, bumping Dex to 20 and Wiz to 17. We also get another Mastery, which I'll just put in the Quarterstaff, on the off chance the topple is ever useful. For 15th level, I'm taking 1 more in Monk. We get a big boost in damage by going up to D10 martial arts dice, as well as improved Shadow Step, which actually isn't that good, but the Bright Light benefit can come up. The main reason that I'm doing this is to delay the level 8 fighter feat to 19, so that we can get an epic boon. We wouldn't be able to take one otherwise, and there's one boon which is just really good on this build. Okay, back to Fighter. We already have extra attack, so we just get Tactical Shift. It's not great. Step of the Wind is probably just a better version of it, and we likely weren't using that very often anyways. At 17 we get another feat though, which will be Inspiring Leader, bumping us up to 18 Wiz, and giving the entire party 21 temp HP every single rest. At 18 we get a second fighting style for Champion, and I'll pick up 2 weapon fighting. Technically, dueling is better here. It adds 6 damage if all attacks hit, whereas 2 weapon fighting only adds 5. I've specifically stated that I will not use dueling on a dual wielding build though, so I won't. Nothing else this level, so let's go on to 19 where we get our epic boon. The standard offensive pick here is Combat Prowess, with the most common alternative being Dimensional Travel, although given our movement abilities, that's got some redundancy. Boon of the Night Spirit is a fantastic defensive option, giving us effectively permanent resistance to everything except Radiant and Psychic, and I think that this is almost objectively the best pick. Ignore everything else I say here and just get Night Spirit. Probably swap out the ASI at 14 for something like Skill Expert or Slasher, and then have Night Spirit be your 18 Wiz. Our defences are already absolutely exceptional though, and there's one other boon that is almost never picked, so I just want to do it. We have 6 attacks per turn and advantage on all of them. Combat Prowess is not the best defensive option. Irresistible Offense is. With this, we get to ignore BPS resistance, and every time we roll a 20, we add 21 damage. Importantly, it does need to be a 20. Our expanded crit range doesn't help here, but we still have about a 46% chance of hitting this at least once every single turn, 11% chance of hitting it at least twice. Finally, 20th level gives us Indomitable, a reroll of a failed save, as well as Tactical Master, letting us use Push, Sap or Slow on any of our weapon attacks. Technically we could have gone Monk 12 to get a second epic boon, which would obviously have been Night Spirit, and that would have bumped us up to 22 Dex, but I don't want to. Double dipping on epic boons just feels a bit off to me, but it is 100% a thing you can do, and if you're playing this build at 20, I do actively recommend it. That +1 alone actually boosts your damage up to like 79, because we have so many compounding modifiers on our attacks. It's wild. So that's the build. Consistently above the rogue standard, right from 1 to 20, and an incredible defensive pull, with disadvantage on all attacks, deflect attacks, and the positional benefits of not being on the front lines. And on the save side, we have proficiency in both Con and Dex, as well as a decent Wiz score, evasion, Mage Flare for an automatic success, immunity to a whole host of sight-based saving throws, and at level 20, Indomitable. You also probably have resistance to everything except Psychic and Radiant, but I was silly and decided against that. I'd also like to point out just how good our scouting abilities are with high stealth, perception, and sleight of hand for lockpicking, as well as pass without trace, high speed, and free infinite use teleports to just skip across heavily guarded areas. There is one last thing that I want to talk about with this build, although it's kind of technical. You see, when I do the maths for a build, I don't just do the mean average damage. I get a few other figures too, such as the standard deviation, which tells me how much variance there is in your damage, or in other words, how swingy it is. One figure that I personally find incredibly useful is what I call the deviation percent. This is the standard deviation divided by the average damage, and the fun thing about it is that it lets you compare the variance of different builds like for like. For example, at 5th level, a Warlock using Eldritch Blast and Hex has a deviation percent of 64%. A fighter with a Greatsword for Graze and Great Weapon Master has 34%, and a rogue using a light crossbow with steady aim has 54%. The 4s were coincidental. The lower the number, the more consistent the damage. As we can see, the fighter is more consistent than the others, which would be expected because of Graze. In general, I consider 55% to be pretty reasonable, and 35% to be very reliable. Well, here's the deviation percents for this Black Volley Shadow Monk. It spends the majority of its career from level 6 to 18 in the 20%. It is an insanely consistent build. You are really likely to do something close to this average DPR. And that is how you monk a shadow. Hope you enjoyed this. I don't have many builds on this channel, but if you don't mind 2014 ones, I'm really fond of this one which uses Armour of Agathis. I might do a druid when the monster manual comes out, since there's a lot of changes to wild shape which result in some very interesting new combos, so subscribe for that. And if you have any friends interested in playing a monk, why not send them this video as some inspiration? Bye!